Welcome. I'm Julie Bacon, and you're listening to the Mindset Coaching for Handlers podcast, a podcast for dog handlers who are on a mission to achieve big goals. Here I share lessons, insights, personal stories, and tools you can apply during your next show, trial, or test to help you strengthen your mental game and hopefully cue more consistently. Be sure to check out the show notes where you'll find details about the episodes, plus important links, including the link to the Dogged Planner and Workbook created just for handlers on a mission. So if you're ready to improve your competitive mindset, get out of your own way, and connect with your dog like never before, then it's time to get comfy, bring an open mind, and work your mindset. Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast. Okay, this week we're talking about inner critic. And inner critic, very similar to self-talk, but we're just going to pick out the nasty bits, okay? In other words, the negative bits of our self-talk, and refer to them as inner critic. So I think everyone probably has an inner critic. I think everyone's probably familiar with an inner critic. It's that voice that tells you you can't. You shouldn't. You should have doubts. It's the voice that doubts yourself, maybe thinks that you have imposter syndrome and you have no business doing whatever it is you're about to do, okay? So the inner critic is based in fear, and it really is designed, kind of ironically, I feel like, to keep you safe. You know, it's designed to keep you from failing, for instance, right? So if you are going into the ring or going to try maybe some big event that you haven't done, or go to some new trial or something that is out of your comfort zone, your inner critic is that fear that is telling you like, oh, you shouldn't go. Like, you shouldn't go. You might fail. You know, are you really prepared for this? Or do you really feel like you belong in that kind of area? You know, do you really think you should go to that trial? Do you have any business going to that trial? Those are kinds of the thoughts that our inner critic brings up to us. And the thing is about that is that the inner critic wants to keep you safe, because it doesn't want you to fail, right? If it tells you might fail, then maybe you'll stay home and you won't try, and then you won't fail. Success, right? Now the inner critic has been successful in keeping you safe, okay? But the flip side of it is that the inner critic, like most thoughts in our head, like we want to be right. Like we want to be proven right. You know, I mean, isn't that like the basis of most arguments, right? We want our point, our perspective to be the correct one. Well, when we have these negative, based in fear thoughts, then what happens is our mind wants to be right. So sometimes it sets ourselves up to have that exact thing happen. The exact thing maybe that we were afraid of might happen, right? That we choked in the finals, or, you know, we couldn't turn it around on a bad run or something like that. And so I think that is the other danger of letting our inner critic kind of run amok in our brains and having those thoughts. And then, of course, we're going to have thoughts. This is why this is about befriending our inner critic, because we're going to always have inner critic thoughts, but it's what we do with those thoughts that really matters. Okay. So do you have a thought like that and you're like, that's crap. That's not even true. Like, go sit down in the corner, inner critic. Or do you have a thought like that and you're like, oh my God, you're right. I should stay home. You're right. It might rain, or it might snow, or it might be too hot. I should just not go. Okay. So it's what we do with the thought. Now, regarding the thoughts, we are not our thoughts. I know that's sort of like an existential maybe thing for us to say, but like we have all kinds of thoughts in our head every day, but it doesn't make them true, right? Novelists have all kinds of thoughts in their heads and not true at all. You know, maybe they're just great ideas, or maybe they're just wild thoughts, or maybe there's intrusive thoughts, I should say, that just catch you by storm. It doesn't mean that that's who we are, right? So when we have a moment like right now where we're not being bombarded with some inner critic, we actually have the space to think about, oh, yeah, that's true. Like, I have thoughts all the time that don't define me. You know, I would like to rear end that mean lady on the road, but I don't do it. So I had the thought, but I didn't do it, right? So we aren't our thoughts. And it's a really important distinction because when we can get some separation between ourselves and our thoughts, then we make space to decide how we want to respond to the thought. Banish the thought, accept the thought, or something else in between. Okay? I like to think of my thoughts, and especially like my inner critic and some of those other voices, as like little people sitting around one of those big giant mahogany conference room tables from old movies. And I realize, because I've had this conversation before, that not everybody thinks in these terms or visualizes their thoughts in the same way. So just for those people who like cannot imagine having like this in their brains or having like this visual, just stick with it for the analogy. Okay. Because your thoughts are like a bunch of people at a conference table. So take it that way. But for me, I think of those, like I literally picture it in my head. It's like a bunch of people sitting around a big conference table and they're all coming from a different angle. And yes, my inner critic is there. Like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Or like, are you prepared enough for that? Like, that might not go well. And the cheerleader is there. Like, yeah, do it. What the heck? What's the worst that can happen? Yay, yay, go team, And then, there's the person who's like risk averse, who's there, and the other person who's risk tolerant. So there's all of these like thoughts, and like Buddhists call it monkey mind, where you are just like jumping from thought to thought to thought to thought, that it's just never peaceful in there. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about and do experience peace in your like non-thinking time, very jealous. That must be amazing. But still, I think the analogy works in that you can think of your inner critic as someone who walks up to you and says something rude. Okay. So if it was a person walking up to you saying something rude, you for sure would have that space, that distance between the thought, the thing coming out of this person's mouth, and yourself. So that's all we're trying to do, is build some distance between you and your inner critic thought so that you realize that you are not your thoughts, that you have agency over them. You can hear them, but not actually give them attention. You don't have to, like, for instance, you don't have to buy into everything you think, and you can determine what you want to do with that. Okay. So our inner critic for handlers, I mean, it shows up obviously in all kinds of ways, especially when we do something new, we go push ourselves out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone, as we talked about the other week. It can rear up and surprise us, I think, in a lot of moments. And that surprise factor is one of the reasons I would love for you to journal some of your more common inner critic thoughts that you have. And literally just like on the left side of a piece of paper, just write down some of your common ones. Or maybe you were at a recent trial or a big event or something like that, and you had some of these inner critic thoughts come up, whatever it was. Put yourself back there and what were you thinking about? Just brainstorm it out. And it's helpful to do this because then what you want to be able to do is turn those thoughts around, okay? Or first, ideally, you look at that thought and you're like, where's that even coming from? Is that true? Do I truly believe that about myself? Like, why was I thinking it that day? Was I feeling vulnerable? Because I think that for instance, if someone walks up to you at a grocery store and just suddenly blurts in your face, that's the ugliest hat I've ever seen, you feel like surprised. I would feel surprised. My first reaction wouldn't be some pithy comeback. It would just be like, I would probably stand there sort of flat-footed, like in shock and feeling kind of vulnerable that this stranger hates my hat and felt like she needed to tell me about it. Like, whoa. And so if we can be prepared for our inner critic thoughts, then we're not caught as flat-footed and we don't feel as vulnerable and we don't feel like we have to believe them, right? So if I knew that lady was going to walk up to me and yell at me about my hat, I would have probably had something prepared, or I would have a pithy retort. I would have something to say instead of being caught off guard and feeling vulnerable. So it's helpful to do that with our own thoughts as well. So if you're doing the exercise where you are writing down things on the left side of the page or sort of brainstorming that, then to know like, well, when that thought comes up, what am I going to do? Am I going to rewrite it? Am I going to ignore it? Or am I going to know where it's coming from? So then again, I have even more space between me and the thought, because I'm be like, oh, I know where that thought's coming from. That thought's coming from 5 years ago when we were at this trial, and the fan suddenly kicked on when we were in the ring, and it spooked my dog, who I don't even have anymore or is not running this weekend. So that fear is moot, right? So sometimes being able to trace it down takes the sting out of it. And certainly being able to rewrite it takes the sting out of it as well. Okay. So speaking of rewriting, I really want you to think about how you can reframe your inner critic and the, just the input that you get. Because oftentimes actually, in any critique that we receive, there is a bit of usable truth. Right? If we get some constructive feedback from our instructor, that's usable feedback for us, right? And sometimes in our inner critic thinking, there are some things that we can take away from it. If it's a thought that we keep having, how do we, if we keep having it at multiple shows, for instance, it's a common inner critic thought, then what can we do about it? Is this a mindset problem you're having, or do you feel unprepared? Do you need to do more preparation? Would that make you feel better? What is the antidote to this? And sometimes the antidote is kind of also in the question or in the fear. Sometimes there's a clue in it. And which is great, because then we know what to do about it, or what to do about it for next time. So that is one way to reframe, because you're taking that criticism from yourself and you're looking for the feedback, and you're saying okay, I hear what you're saying. Most of that is BS, and I don't need that in my life, that kind of energy in my life. But that one little nugget, yes, you're right. Next time I will do this differently, and then I won't be so angsty about it. Right? It'll feel better from my anxiety or what have you. Okay. So not all of your inner critic is bad, but probably the tone or in which it was delivered is not super helpful. Okay. So think about how you can reframe some common critical thoughts that you're having, or how you can get the nugget of feedback out of it so that you can let the rest of the thought go. Okay. All right. A couple more things when we come back. Quick question. Do you ever wish you had more mindset help? Well, the Q membership was created just for that reason. Every month we pick a topic, and then we have 4 lessons, which are kind of like these podcasts, that we dive deeper into. And so if you are ready for more, you're ready for more mindset work, think about joining the Q membership. Annual members get a free coaching session, but you can also choose the monthly option as well. Go to theqcoach.com to learn more. Let's get back to the episode. All right, the next thing I want you to think about when you have those inner critic thoughts is a little self-compassion, okay? And how I want you to get there, how I think is the fastest way to get there, is when those inner critic thoughts come up, ask yourself, would I say this to a good friend? Would I actually speak this sentence in this way, with this tone, to anyone that I really cared about? And usually the answer is no, right? We usually don't speak to others the way we speak to ourselves. And so that's a really quick way to turn around, kind of how you're speaking to yourself. And use a little bit self-compassion, use a little kind talk, some mindfulness, and just treat yourself like you would another person. The other thing to do in this moment is, and I think this is an act of self-compassion, is you ask yourself, is that thought objectively true? Right? Is whatever thought that you're having oh, I don't deserve to be at this trial. Is that true? No, I'm just being dramatic, right? So a lot of times we can really debunk, the thoughts that we're having by just asking the question, is this objectively true? Would my best friend, would my most supportive person in my life tell me oh yeah, that's 100% true, right? Probably not. And so I think that is another version of compassion, self-compassion, when we realize that we need to be telling ourselves the truth. And that a lot of times this fear-mongering out of our inner critic is not even being truthful. They're being so hyperbolic. They're exaggerating so much that it's just not even true anymore. So it's just a ridiculous statement. So to be honest with yourself and truthful goes both ways. We always think of like, oh, I need to be more honest with myself, thinking I need to be harder on myself. And that's not true. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to be really honest and be like, I totally deserve to be here as much as anyone else. This is just a normal trial. I paid my money. I'm coming in. My dog's ready. We're going to see how it goes. Maybe it won't be perfect, but we're here and we're going to give it a go. Okay. So there's a lot of more compassionate ways that you can approach the situation that again gives you more control over your mind and like the stuff that your mind is feeding you. Because remember, the thoughts that we have on repeat become our beliefs. So we can have good thoughts on repeat, like, I love this trial. This is my favorite place to come. My dogs and I always do really well here. We always have a good time here. And that becomes then your belief about that venue. Okay, that's a positive thoughts becoming positive beliefs. But negative thoughts on repeat, like, I'm not good enough. I don't know what I'm doing here. My dog needs a new handler. I'm just not up to it. Whatever you keep repeating those, and those will not only become beliefs, but they'll become limiting beliefs. And limiting because they will start to limit the actions you take, the experiences you have, the growth that you have, because what comes after beliefs is actions, and you will change your actions based on your beliefs. If you love that venue and you always do well at that venue, you're going to take the action to make sure that you enter whatever is at that venue because you like it there. Whereas if you think you hate that venue or that you hate that judge or the judge hates you or whatever it is, then the action you take will be not to go, not to have that experience. Okay? Simple example, but that is how our thoughts become our beliefs, become our actions. And then, of course, depending on the actions that we take will depend on our results. Did we walk into the ring feeling good and happy and excited because we love this venue? Or did we walk in with like dread and being like, this isn't going to work, with our Eeyore voice, it's woe is me. It's all going to go badly, then that's probably the results that you're going to get. Okay. So that is all to me within this realm of being self-compassionate, because when I treat myself better, I get better results. When I treat myself poorly, we know the results that we get, right? So I think that's part of it. And taking time to really sit with your recurring inner critic and ask them, like, where's this coming from? What do you need from this? What are you trying to protect me from? Like, what are you trying to do here? Okay. So I think that is super important to think about it. And then what we end up happening once we have this awareness, once we're making some changes, then what ends up happening is when we have the thought, we don't react like instantaneously and be like, oh my God, yes, anxiety, engage. What we instead realize is we take a moment, take just a beat, and then we can choose a different thought. Or we can choose to throw that thought out and be like, that's ridiculous. That's not even true. Like, go sit down in the back. Like, I don't want to hear from you the rest of the day. Inner critic, like, you're done. Okay. And then we have some space between us and those thoughts. And then we can make a different choice, whether that's an action or a different choice in terms of creating a new thought for ourselves. I love mantras and affirmations for this, right? Like having those in the morning, like to just kind of think about like how you want the day to go. People who don't do mantras and affirmations like don't realize how powerful they are. I feel like everybody like, that can't work. Like a stupid couple words on a sticky note every day, that can't really work. And to those people I say, well, then you haven't done it for 30 days because it really can help set the tone for the day. So whether that's a mantra within your ritual or whether that's, an affirmation that you're telling yourself in the morning when you're brushing your teeth, whatever that is, they really can set the tone for a more positive, intentional day. So strongly recommend that in addition to your journaling and reframing and figuring out like what you would be better off saying to yourself than that inner critic, right? Editing that. Okay. All right. So this week, I want you to notice your inner critic. I want you to notice all the places it pops up, because the good thing about working with your inner critic is it's happening all the time, right? You're probably having inner critic thoughts at the grocery store or driving or going to work or, whatever the case may be. And so that just means you have all those extra opportunities to practice. You don't have to wait till you have a dog at the end of your leash to practice this. You can be practicing in this all day. So that's what I want. I want you to think about and become more aware of your inner critic thoughts, especially those things that you have on repeat, and see what you can do, whether it's to journal, whether it's to replace it with a mantra, whether it's to just reframe it on the fly, whatever is your choice. How are you going to turn that around? How are you going to turn that inner critic around? What's going to be your tool of choice? What's going to be your go-to? Are you going to go to gratitude? Are you going to, how are you going to work through this? And practice it. Practice it so that when you really need it, you trust in that tool and you trust in your ability to get yourself out of that kind of thinking, right? That's why we build the tools when life is good, so that when life is rough, we can access them very easily. Okay? All right, so that's your homework. Also, the other thing I wanted to say is we're doing this all month in the membership. We are going deep on the inner critic, really trying to set the tone for the new year with a much more positive, can-do spirit. And so if your inner critic, your self-talk is something that you struggle in, this might be your sign to join the membership finally. Okay, so think about that. Because we'll be over there doing this kind of stuff for the next several weeks. All right, no matter what you're up to this week with your dog, I hope you have a fantastic time. Thanks so much for listening to the Mindset Coaching for Handlers podcast with me, Julie Bacon. I am so grateful for your precious time. Check out my Dogged Planner, workbook, and journal available on Amazon. Just search for Dogged Planner. I also offer monthly membership that's perfect for ongoing support of your awesome goals. Check out theqcoach.com for details, or just stop by and check out all the ways you can work on your mindset. And be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at theqcoach and let me know how it's going. Finally, please share, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps us podcasters tremendously. Plus, I know I get my best podcast recommendations from friends. Thanks, and have a great week with your dogs.